you just kind of go into life, and it's like, yeah, of course, everybody's like this that's part of my social group. And then, as you get to be, an adult and you start encountering different groups and different social systems and cultures and so on, there may be options for you to adopt different virtues. Greetings and welcome to another edition of the How to Be Intelligent podcast. Here we're on a never-ending quest to discuss and discover what it means to be an intelligent person and an intelligent society, and how intelligence will help people and cultures to flourish. I'm your host, Dr. Tom Denning, and my co-host is Kate Cruz. Join us as we discover the secrets of living intelligently and flourishing in our chaotic era. Our journey will take us through the realms of philosophy, education, psychology, chaos theory, neuroscience, and beyond. Are you ready? Today's topic is intellectual virtues.
Intellectual virtues? That kind of sounds mysterious, Tom. Did you happen upon some stone tablet that has the key to intelligence inscribed on it?
Yeah, I've been working on this whole concept of how to be intelligent for a long time, and maybe all of my life, to be honest with you. And there is no stone tablet. Let's just make that plain right away. And I certainly don't make any special claims to be highly intelligent or in Einstein or anything like that. What's interesting about it is that from Plato and the Greeks and Socrates and Aristotle, people have been thinking about what it means to be an intelligent human being. And maybe if you think about it, it's a topic that is maybe the most important topic that we could possibly discuss. Is really, how do you begin to deal with this, this world? And our world today is so full of information and conflicting information, and so many different forces are acting on humans of all ages, that it sometimes seems incredibly confusing. How do you deal with all of this information? How do you can Google almost anything you want, and in many cases it's very convenient, but it also, in other cases, it's incredibly confusing and chaotic. So I decided to try to encapsulate all my years of work. Obviously, I've got a PhD in education and a master's degree in philosophy. And so I've been studying this question from a lot of different perspectives for a long time. And it's amazing when I look at all the different disciplines that are looking at intelligence, everything from artificial intelligence, which is kind of an interesting concept if you think about it. I mean, is there really different kinds of intelligence so that we could describe something as being artificially intelligent? It's kind of interesting. So to make a long story short, philosophers who are probably the most obsessed with what it means to be intelligent in terms of any kind of a disciplinary profession, right? I mean, ever since, like I said, Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and the early Greeks, philosophers have been exploring this question about what it means to have human knowledge. And over the last couple of decades, they've come upon a whole new approach that I think is consistent with some of the intellectual developments that are probably here to stay. Many intellectual eras come and go, and in some cases it's we return to them from time to time because there's some truths in there that are helpful to us. But I think one of the things that we've pretty much come to realize is that some of the assumptions of Plato and Socrates and Aristotle really took us down a pathway of trying to understand knowledge as being absolute certainty, right? And that somehow or other we were able to sort of land upon some type of insights that were going to be there for us forever, and that could actually adjudicate between different knowledge claims. And that's what philosophers have been striving for. And only in the last maybe 100 years since the advent of American pragmatism with William James and John Dewey, and famously in the 20th century with Richard Rorty, have we begun to realize that that claims to absolute certainty are just sort of keeping us locked within a fly bottle, and we're buzzing around inside this fly bottle. And maybe we should escape to a new intellectual tradition And this tradition now has been kind of encapsulated within what they call the intellectual virtues. And it's kind of a replacement for that tradition that was begun over 2,000 years ago by Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, as I mentioned. And it's an interesting new approach to intellectual life definition of virtue. So it's consistent, right? Number one, it's consistent. And I always like to use as an example the virtue of honesty, right? And many people think of honesty as a virtue. And so if you think about it, right, if I was honest only when it was convenient to me or only when it served my ends, right, I probably wouldn't be ascribed as practicing the virtue of honesty because I'm only doing it when it's convenient for me. So clearly, for a society or a social group to say that somebody has a particular virtue, they need to practice it on a consistent basis. And then it's positive, right? So whatever group I associate with or identify with, right? So we all have different social groups with which we identify, and it's part of what defines us as human beings. There's no question about that. And it's important to us, right? And you and I identify as educators, and we're very curious about education and what it means to be a human being and flourish. And we think education is a big part of human flourishing. So what's sort of positive within that identity, right? And we kind of have a sense of, this never ending quest. And that's why we do this podcast together, because it's a never ending quest to create a different way of understanding what education is. And you and I are never going to land on the final word on this, but we enjoy this journey that we're on together. And that's the positive kind of piece of this, that you and I work together on this podcast. And then it's action, right? So that means that it's something that you freely decide, right? So if somebody put a gun to my head and said, be honest, well, I don't have much of a choice, right? I have to be honest. But I make a choice every single day if I want to be seen as an honest human being. And obviously, right, there's many different kinds of things that might occur to a human being, impulses and so on, that would lead them astray from being an honest human being. And so therefore, it's not something that you can be cavalier about. It's something, especially in the early days of adopting a virtue, that you have to pay a lot of attention to that and make sure that you're staying true to that particular way of life. And then evaluate it, of course, to see how it's performing in your life and whether that's something that you want to continue to do. But so consistent positive action, right? So, and then it's in the world. And that means that there's actual consequences of this kind of behavior. And there's two ways, basically, that humans adopt a virtue. Yeah, and of course, one is kind of organically, and it's like, okay, I grew up in this family, in this culture, in this church or whatever. And these are the virtues that I learned. And so, it's just, you just kind of go into life and it's like, yeah, of course, everybody's like this, that's part of my social group. And then, as you get to be, an adult and you start encountering different groups and different social systems and cultures and so on, there may be options for you to adopt different virtues. And in some cases, maybe even shed some of those that you thought were sort of, natural to who you are as a human being. And that's a difficult process. But there's only, so that's one way. And that's the two ways, right? One is organically and the other is sort of by choice as a human adult. And usually that happens more in adulthood, and certainly perhaps that's part of adolescence as people get outside their family circles and they begin to, experience different belief systems and so on. And they struggle with that. And it's like, oh my goodness, look at how much success they're having with their particular way of life. And I'm sort of encumbered by, my way of life. And so you can go through these transformations from time to time in life. And the way to do that, number one, is, of course, you have to try it on. Right. So in order to adopt a new virtue as an adult, you have to try it on. It's like a new jacket, right? You try it on and it's like, okay, how is this thing working out for me? Is this a good fit? And then you have to reflect. Right. So you can't adopt a new virtue without trying it. I mean, so it's a challenge. And that means that as a human being, if I want to change my life, transform my life, become consistent in some other ways of of living, and new habits that I want to adopt, and how it is that human beings come to know. And of course, that was the pursuit of certainty. Once we gave up the pursuit of certainty and realized that we're constantly adapting and adjusting to the world, what kinds of behaviors can we consistently practice that are going to help us deal with this chaos in a more effective way, right? And intellectual virtues has come to the fore as a new area of study that not only has implications for, armchair philosophy.
And I
Yeah.
was reading an article by a researcher named Sherry Tishman, and she equates the difference between intelligence and the old definition of that and this new definition of the virtues as being the difference between asking someone, can you play the piano, and do you play the piano? So the second question really encapsulates so much more than just the ability to play the piano, but our testing and our structures are really centered still in, can you play? Not do you enjoy playing? Do you play regular? And that ability of being able to play the piano is not necessarily indicative of being like a lifelong piano player, because you have to enjoy it, be committed, practice it every day, kind of like holding those virtues close for it to, be a part of your life moving forward. So I love everything that you said so far about this shifting definition of the pursuit of knowledge.
Yeah, that's really well said. The distinction really is between the old IQ score, which was sort of measuring what's in your head, because clearly you're sitting doing an IQ test and there's absolutely no kinds of ongoing environmental challenges other than that test itself, which is entirely based on a notion of intelligence as some analyticity. Mostly it's analytic intelligence. So it only measures a very, very small realm of what it means to be intelligent. And of course, in my studies of inactive and embodied cognition, it's more of a focus on know-how and the dispositions that you have to behave in the world, as opposed to know that. That's important. And that really runs right along with with the distinction you just made between can you play the piano and do you play the piano. And I just love the way you just said that. I think it's a really great way of describing this, because you're right. I mean, if you think about the paradigm that drives most of education, formal education is still driven by the paradigm of drill and test. And we still, most of our politicians, and they're well intended. Let's not get that wrong. But if you think about most of the people that go into and have political power in education are those who don't rock the boat, who don't challenge traditional paradigms. Right. The only way they rise to power. What's that?
Yeah, they've been successful within the current structure too. It's hard for them to understand those who have not.
That's correct, right? So people like me who tend to criticize traditional education, we have to do podcasts and other kinds of things in order to get the word out about what is being discovered out there on the fringes of education, on the fringes of human flourishing. And I don't mind that. It's fun. I mean, I'm constantly investigating this, and it takes you down a lot of rabbit holes, and sometimes you have to back out of those rabbit holes and realize, okay, that idea was just a little too crazy, but there are a lot of good, crazy ideas out there. And that's what we want to explore in this podcast. Are those crazy ideas, like the fact that you can identify a set of intellectual virtues and live by them and be able to become an intelligent human being without the need for any kind of formal education necessarily. In fact, I truly believe that we're going to be migrating the model of formal education over the next couple of decades in a massive way. We've been talking about this for a long time, and it's been on the horizon. People have been just, talking about the fact that online education is coming and it's going to revolutionize things. I think it's going to go deeper than that. I think there's going to be a lot of alternative types of education, hopefully encouraged by our politicians, so that charter schools and other kinds of experiments will have an opportunity to work with what I might call, human material, right? And help us all understand better how it is that we're going to be able to transform our lives in ways that optimize our own individualized capabilities.
So with all that, you have to help our listeners understand, give us some examples of what are the intellectual virtues?
Yeah.
Something they can take away, all of us, including me, and start practicing today.
Yeah. Yeah. And philosophers, like I said, who are in this stream of research have identified several, some are obvious, like curiosity, right? And intellectual courage, but there are others that are more or less on the fringe that really, I think are more important than those that are obvious, right? So the obvious ones are, well, you want to be curious, and what does that mean to be curious? Well, obviously, you take a look behind me and all these books. I'm a curious person. I want to understand a lot of different realms of human endeavor. I'm very into biographies right now because I want to see how other people had to face the challenges of life and how they were able to manage that, and the different ways that they engaged with the challenges of their own lives and the times in which they lived. And our diversity that we have today in terms of this chaotic world that we're talking about, it's not something to be feared. It's something to be managed. And you manage it in part by having faith in yourself, right? Faith in yourself that you're going to be resourceful enough to be able to make it. Now, the analogy I like to use on this, and there's a great book, by the way, called Undaunted Courage. It's about the Lewis and Clark expedition, and people can have all kinds of opinions about Lewis and Clark and whether they, invaded indigenous territory. That's fine, right? I mean, that conversation is not apropos to what I'm bringing up here. But you think about them in St. Louis at the beginning of their journey, which was literally the beginning of the frontier at that time. And they wanted to find the Northwest Passage. And this is just 200 years ago. When you think about it, it's 200 years ago. And so they set out to find, their way to Oregon, Washington, and the Pacific Ocean and so on. And of course, they faced the big unknown. They really had no idea what was out there. Now, they were provisioned. They had provisions. They had, guns and wagons full of food and so on, but it wasn't enough to get back. It wasn't even enough to get there. So the only thing they had was hope. They had to have hope that they were going to be able to find the resources that they needed along the way, that they're going to be able to be intelligent enough to solve the problems that they have no idea that they're about to encounter. We don't teach that anymore. We don't have that kind of pioneering spirit. It's gone because there's very little left in the way of a frontier, right? So the last frontier really is your own life and what your life is going to bring. And, I really want to see that virtue emphasized more in school systems, that that the children, the adults that are studying, they literally can break out of the institutionalization. And there's many organizations that honor people like that today. We call them entrepreneurs, right? Or something like that. And they literally are inventing new things inside of the enterprise. That's okay. I'm not saying break out and find some kind of a, Lewis and Clark frontier. There's just none of those left. You have to find your own frontier. And for me, right, it's this exploration of human intelligence. And today I feel more agitated about it than I ever have, because I just see so much chaos around the world and so much of an inability for human beings to harmonize themselves and come to kind of some type of understanding of what makes us all humans, and where we can kind of, and it's not globalization. I'm not interested in things like that, where we have to all sort of have the same values. I think we have to be comfortable with the fact that there's different social experiments going on around the world. And that's just, and that's okay.
I love everything you're saying. You and I as educators, we're deeply invested in the futures of humans, the people we know and people we don't know. And what I'm noticing, as everyone is noticing, is that now's that time for transformational learning to shift. But what are some of the obstacles we can remove that are currently preventing human flourishing? In this moment, we can be intentional and we can take those barriers away and not just go back to doing things as they've always been. Can you identify some of the
I teach entrepreneurship from a virtues perspective as well. And I have my students, for example, I mean, think about my students. They're 20 to 24 years old. Okay. And I mean, you can remember what you were like at 20, at 24 years old. Mostly you're kind of self-centered. What's going to happen to me? Am I going to get my fair share in life? And, I'm going to try to get all these A's and all that stuff. And then everything's going to work out for me. And I tell them, look, nobody's going to, nope, other than perhaps your first interview of your first entry level job, nobody's going to care about your GPA, right? So what's going to matter is, what are you doing? What do you do? And so one of the things that I have my students do, and I've got some entrepreneurial virtues that I teach, and I use the same definition of virtue: consistent positive action in the world. And if you want to point your life in the entrepreneurial direction, the central virtue of entrepreneurs is create value for other people, right? So here's what I ask my kids to do. They say, okay, as your individual project for this semester, which is a 15-week semester, I say, for your individual project, I want you to wake up every morning for the next 15 weeks, just, that's 90 days, whatever that, and for the next 90 days, when you wake up in the morning, you put your feet on the floor and you say to yourself, how can I go out and create value for other people today? Rather than, oh my, I got an exam coming up, or, oh, gee, I hope I get, I hope I don't get, I hope I don't get screwed today by, my boss or whatever. How do I create value for the people? So now you begin to reorient yourself, right? Rather than thinking of yourself as a victim of all these impulses, you think of yourself as a productive member of a social group. We call it entrepreneurship, and all these entrepreneurs. And what you're doing basically is, now you're thinking, how do I use my talents? How do you flow into becoming an intelligent person? Well, you do so by practicing these virtues. And so anyway, I'm like, okay, let's see. And I'm just amazed at how much these young people say, thank you for putting me into this exercise. It has changed my life. It has changed me in ways I never expected. I can't believe that virtues are not taught more generally as part of my educational experience. And I haven't gone in and tried to do some kind of scientific validation of this of the data that we're collecting here. It's anecdotal to some extent, but it's incredibly rewarding as a teacher to see that kind of feedback, and it's getting more and more consistent. As I've learned better how to communicate what that means, different people will be able to absorb information at different paces. So the fact that I can't do well on an exam doesn't mean I'm not going to learn this stuff better than you over my lifetime. It just takes me longer, right? I didn't learn it in 15 weeks, right? But I'm interested in this stuff, and I'm going to learn it better than you, right? So it's a shame, even for those who don't want to become an entrepreneur, right? They have now learned a process of how it is that they can transform themselves when they decide to go and join some other social category, right? It's like, okay, I've got to adopt the virtues of this category, and I need to understand what that means. That means I have to practice it consistently. And in the early days, that means being very self-conscious about it, right? So for me, creating value for other people is just a natural part of life now. I don't need to wake up every day and think about that. That's the way I live my life. It's the way I want to be. And it's what I am. And so when people learn this process of the flow nature of human development, then it doesn't matter whether they're going to be an entrepreneur or whether they want to adopt the intellectual virtues or the virtues of some other community. They now know how to transform themselves, and they understand what it takes to do that.
And when I hear about you talking about this latest group of essays, I hear evidence of other virtues that you weren't even focusing on for that exercise, evidence of humility and cooperation, and right. These practices that will carry you through a lifetime. It's content agnostic, because these are just the disciplines Correct. And approaches to life that will carry people through whatever challenges they have.
There's a GEM experience series that I'm doing with a company called AnswerSource. And that's called How to Be Intelligent. So that's going to be based on the intellectual virtues. We are building that right now. Several of the GEM Experience modules are available right now. And I'm currently writing a book called How to Be Intelligent. And that should be coming out hopefully sometime within the next year and a half. And I am having a blast writing it. It's been a journey. It's been challenging as I've gone down a lot of rabbit holes trying to be as articulate as I possibly can about this. And what I call my book, the approach that I'm taking, I call it practical poetry. And what that means is that I don't claim to be the last word on intelligence. There's no such thing. What I want to do is show people that there's a lot of different perspectives on this topic. Everything from, as I mentioned before, the deep learning, machine learning, and artificial intelligence to neuroscience and different philosophies and how this all integrates. And of course, it's never the last word. It's just a journey. And so I call it practical poetry because in part, I'm not writing something that's like a reference book. It's not going to be something that you would pull off the shelf and say, well, Dr. Denning said. No, it's going to be something that I think is just going to help you to appreciate what it takes to transform your own life and what it takes to become a more agile from an intellectual perspective. And that means that, it's in many ways provocative. And hopefully, it provokes people to think, oh, okay, I can transform my life. I can be a different person than I've channeled myself to be since I was just a little tiny little tot, right? I can literally go through this process of transformation and understand how it works. And, where it takes you and what kinds of new identity you're going to, embrace and adopt as a result of that, who knows? That's what poetry is supposed to do. It's supposed to open your mind to different things. And, I just happen to be weaving together different threads of intellectual life, philosophy, science, psychology, humanities, right? I'm weaving that together, and hopefully, it'll be something that people will return to. They put it on their shelf and they go, oh, wow, that was provocative and I've learned something. And then they pick it up, 6 months later and they go, I just learned something. I read this before, but now I'm looking at it from a whole different perspective, right? That's what poetry does. So
thank you so
rather
much,
than being
Dr.
certain, right? Rather than being certain, you want to be timeless.
Say that again. Say that part again, Tom.
What's that?
Say that part again. Rather than certain, you want to be timeless. Just say that again.
Oh, yeah. Well, I as I mentioned, there's, I don't believe in certainty. I don't think that there is absolute knowledge. So in my book, and using the approach I call practical poetry, I'm looking to be timeless, not certain.
I think those are great parting words. And thank you, Dr. D, as always, such a pleasure. Look forward to connecting again.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Talk to you next time.
Okay.
Well, that was fun.